I work with the Agenda for Children. I won't give you our whole theory of change and our whole shared beliefs, but we do have a website. I'll put it in the chat in a little while, or you can Google it. But just to be clear, we have principles that drive our work, and you referred to some of them in terms of us wanting to make sure all young people are getting access because of the benefits that we know data tells us after school, summer programs, all out of school time, our OST programs provide to us, to humans growing up. We know that school can be challenging. It can be tough. It can be a mismatch. Any given grade, any given teacher match with a young person, any given day, we can have a struggle. And so having an opportunity to go to an after-school program where you have youth workers and program directors that are centering the young people, supporting them and their identity, giving them chance to have choice, to explore their curiosity, build interests. These are things that should be happening and often do happen in good learning spaces inside schools. But the after school space and the Agenda for Children, what we're trying to do is ensure that any program that a young person goes into, particularly grades K-8, that they're going to have an opportunity to build relationships, to think about themselves, both in the present and in the future, build strong relationships and so forth. And so we support, in many ways, the health of the after school and out of school time sector in Cambridge. There's no superintendent of summer camp. There's no sort of executive director of all school after schools, but we're an intermediary. So we work in between all the programs and between the sectors and the both the city run programs. Department of Human Services runs in some ways more than half of the after school slots in Cambridge. We partner very directly with them. My other co-director, Susan Richards, is anchored there, and I'm anchored at the school department. And so we're able to partner with all the schools, district leadership, school level leadership, to really try to create a more robust view of our young people and to understand who is benefiting and who is still on the outside looking in. The last thing I'll mention is the importance of data for an intermediary, and that is, I can speak to some of it later tonight, but we're really tracking participation. We're tracking how much parents are understanding and registering for programs and scholarships. We're keeping track of how many hours of engagement around professional development activities that the Agenda for Children offers that out of school time staff and directors get. And so I could go on, but I'll just kind of sum it up by saying we know that there is the need for growth. We know that there are gaps in our systems. We know that there have been gaps and a scarcity of programs and slots. And sometimes they're more concentrated to certain parts of the city and certain buildings and certain communities, but they've been there a long time. And COVID really shook loose for some folks the reality that not everybody can get into our programs because of the number of slots. And so now we are faced with an opportunity really to expand and to see what it would take to have enough program slots and spots, if you will, of high quality to serve all the young people in Cambridge who need and deserve them.
Thanks so much for those insights, Kari, and that overview of the systems level work y'all are doing at Agenda for Children. Next up, I want to ask Allegra, can you talk a bit about the programming you run at Baldwin and how it benefits families on the ground, how you think about your mission there as an educator, what you see working well and what isn't? How do you see the after school challenges or shortage impacting families on the ground, and how are y'all navigating that?
Absolutely. So it's very, very present. Like the realities of the after school struggles right now are very present. The last two registrations that we had, our website crashed because so many families were trying to register their children at the same time. And so the reality of the shortage is very, very present for us. And to give folks a bit of background on who we are, the Mariah L. Baldwin Community Center, we're based in the Baldwin neighborhood of Cambridge, and we do a lot of different work. And terms of children's programming, arts programming for adults and youth. We do programming with older adults as well. We have a community newsletter, and we also host the neighborhood council for the Baldwin neighborhood. And so we're seeing different pieces, and we partner with the Baldwin School as well to do our children's programming. So we're in conversation with school families, we're in conversations with all many cross sections of the community and of the neighborhood. And we started as a community school and then incorporated as a nonprofit in 1985. And so since then, we have been thinking about how to support all these cross sections that I've mentioned of the community in terms of being a place that is welcoming and inclusive and that fosters lifelong learning, and that really focuses on creativity. And so in our programs, we have a choice-based structure where every student gets to choose, they get to think through what is their body feeling in this moment, how are they showing up in this space, how do they want to move through the space today to really build their social emotional learning. And then that's something that we then carry through with youth employment opportunities. So we bring many of our youth back as counselors in training in the summer when they're in middle school. And then we bring them back again when they're in high school as mayor's summer youth programming. And so a lot of the leadership in this organization are people who have been here for a long time or have come through our programming. One of our most recent site directors is someone who started with us in kindergarten. And so one of the ways that we see our work is also equipping folks to reach for the things that they want after they've graduated with us in terms of their growing, their learning, their job readiness skills, and all of those different pieces. We want to walk with our youth as much as possible along the way. I think anything else I can speak to about this topic? I will say that for me, my having started as an after-school teacher and then worked at the various different levels, the things that are there are different things that were present to me at different moments in that trajectory. You know, as a teacher, I was thinking about my income. I was thinking about like my time and how and I was very appreciative of Agenda for Children for the professional development resourcing that was available to me at the time. And now that I'm the director of the children's programming, that gratitude remains. And there's a lot of really valuable resourcing that is there. And I really wanted to highlight that because in my trajectory, my own trajectory as a worker in after school settings, I really have appreciated and benefited from partnering with Agenda for Children. And the last thing I'll say is that I've appreciated my move from public school to after school because of the amount of freedom and because of the opportunity that after school provides to work with the whole child in a way that I wasn't able to as genuinely when I was a public school teacher. And I think I'll stop there and I can speak to other questions as they come up.
Rainbow, so drop fingertips over left, making
So
a rainbow.
much, Allegra. I totally hear you about the need to address the needs of the whole child and sort of build a continuum of positive youth development. I'll hand it over now to Councillor Wilson. If you can talk about your perspective on this issue, provide some background on the efforts of the city, of DHSP, of the council, and the school committee to improve access to after school. And in your experience, what have been some of the challenges you've confronted with these efforts?
Thank you so much, Drew, and thank you to C-Reze and Our Revolution for hosting, as well as all of you for being here tonight. Thank you. Yeah, so I will just say after school programming is very much an important place and space for our young people to continue the growth of social emotional learning, being able to connect and build relationships with staff as well as peers, and to really just become more active citizens in society. And I feel like, you know, my experience through after school, through the city, in the city of Cambridge, in a variety of different places, whether it was our youth centers or childcare programs, definitely speaks to my upbringing and kind of where a lot of my gratitude lies, because I know that I learned so much in those spaces based on the staff that were there, who I consider as mentors today, as well as my peers who are still my friends today. And so just speaking to kind of where we are now, my tenure on the school committee, really 3 months in, pandemic hit, right? So a lot of this Kari did speak to, in a sense of how did we pivot in a way to offer more opportunities and programs for our young people, given that there were some after school spots, like, there are 5 of them, the Baldwin being one, East End House, Community Arts Center, Cambridge Community Center, and I think Margaret Fuller House at the time, were our 5 locations that were still operating even during the pandemic and bringing their staff in order to bring in young people. And those locations were able to, through the support of Cambridge Public Schools, bring in our 4th and 5th graders to continue to have some remote learning in those spaces. And as Kari mentioned, they were able to have a full day service in those spaces during that time. Now, when folks return back to school, our young people, we realize and families recognize that those young people still built relationships in those spaces during that time. And those young people really wanted to continue to stay in those programs. And so really thinking about how do we continue a model that services our young people to continue to have those relationships and those services to meet their needs and the family's needs. So through Opera dollars, we've been able to continue to fund those resources and supports for our young people, not only throughout the school year, but also through the summer as well. And that continues to be a robust program and model that I would like to see continue even after Opera dollars are so-called over, right? Because again, when we're meeting the need, we want to continue to meet the need and not pull out and then have families and young people scrambling to figure out where do they go to next. I think as that transitions to my role and my work on the city council and, the conversation around universal after school, this is something that is critically important to me, especially built on the work around universal preschool that I've been, an advocate around and really championing, but understanding that it didn't just start in 2018 or 2019. This conversation has been going on for quite some time around how do we tackle and address equity and really thinking about how we are supporting families in need at a younger age. So if we're getting kids in school younger, that ultimately will support their academic achievement throughout. And so happy that the universal preschool program applications are out. They closed. We had a tons of applicants. And so all 4-year-olds and some 3-year-olds will start in schools later this fall, or at the start of the fall, excuse me. And so when we think about after school program and services, we know that our largest provider is Department of Human Services. And then we have several nonprofits in our city. And through the work of Agenda for Children, especially Kari's work and Susan Richards' work, and how they're actually communicating and talking to those folks about what is your capacity? What are you able to actually do? What, you might already be stretched, but if we could stretch it just a little bit more, what would that look like? And obviously, given that there's licensing restrictions and all that stuff based on space. And I just want to underscore the fact that space is a huge issue. And I really want to debunk any myths that people think just because a program is in a school that they have access to an abundance of space. That is not the way that goes down, okay? I just want to name that. There's a lot of logistics that go on behind the scenes to negotiate space for out of school time providers and other service providers that are in schools. Okay, so I just really want to name that. But I think importantly, we need to have deeper conversations with all stakeholders to look at what could space look like and look differently, like in our schools. What does it look like in our youth centers? What does it look like in other public spaces, even if it's a library or whatever? So just making sure that we're having more robust conversations. And that's kind of where I'm starting. And so on the city council, I do chair the Human Service and Veterans Affairs co-chair with Vice Mayor McGovern. And so a conversation that I'm looking forward to having with Department of Human Services later in April will be just really about this topic, kind of building off of this topic here around what could be the pathway to universal after school. Where do we need to start? Because that's where I'm always at. It's like, I want to move past conversations to actually looking into action and what will be the steps that we need to put into play. And I think also understanding what are our numbers? What is the demand for after school slots across the spectrum from K-8 specifically? And how might we meet those needs based on neighborhoods, right? Are families, are some families just needing 1 day a week care, 3 day a week care, or all 5 days? What does that ultimately look like? So I think we need to have a deeper conversation about the actual need as we dive into a more robust talk around universal after school. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aisha, for illuminating all those important points and making the connection to the city's Universal Pre-K initiative, which did a tremendous job with sort of interagency coordination and aligning resources and programs. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. Can we do something similar for after school? So yeah, I think we want to have the conversation that Aisha just mentioned of what's a clear path forward. What do we need? So could any of you sort of, just elaborate on sort of the magnitude of the problem and the specific barriers to expansion, whether it's staffing, space, transportation, and maybe talk a little more. I know the city has taken some steps towards opportunity expansion, but the shortage persists. So just talking about the persisting barriers. I don't know if Kari wants to take a first pass or should.
I'm happy to jump in and definitely shout out to Allegra, who I saw earlier today. We were talking expansion. We were talking about, a new kindergarten group down the road. We were talking about the struggles that it takes to expand. Aisha, we've been at this a long time, and understanding your work with the teens, like what it takes for them to get to the point where they're going to be involved, engaged, and committed to a program like the workforce, and what it takes for families to have the continuity of care, starting with the preschools or even before that in Cambridge. So, Drew, what I can say is to help folks, at least for those who don't know, the city is supporting our ability to conduct an expansion study around out of school time. And so we just very recently selected a consulting group to work with the Agenda for Children and the city, and really by an extension, the Department of Human Services, which we've mentioned as the major provider of out of school time programs, to look into and assess and analyze gaps that we've talked about already tonight, other barriers that persist. I mean, I'm kind of curious maybe off the top here, if people wanted to, and I see some chatter in the chat, but if people wanted to put in there some of your ideas on what you think the barriers to expansion in Cambridge might be, I think that would kind of help us to get the buzz and kind of see where people are coming in around this. What I can say is there are a lot of facets to this. Yes, we can learn from universal pre-K, and in many ways, out of school time has followed a similar pathway to the preschool community for many decades. Not very far behind, frankly, but when it comes to licensing, when it comes to accreditation, when it comes to scholarships and vouchers, there's a lot of similarities. And we're lucky in Cambridge that we have resources. We hear that all the time, but really the fact that we're able to start talking about universal after school, while universal pre-K is just starting to look at their applications. And that's a beautiful thing because we need it. We need more access. We need more programs. Staffing I see in there, Lissa, thank you, is a huge issue. And for some folks, it could be a blind spot, right? So we've been managing, as Aisha alluded to, scholarships supported both by ARPA and ESSER, COVID recovery funds. There is the pending cliff. There is the pending, you can't spend money beyond this date coming later this calendar year. But even with scholarships being made available to nonprofits to cover tuition for high priority and low income households, staffing is a challenge. And staffing has also been a challenge for the city and Department of Human Service programs where they've tried to expand. They've had to press pause until staffing needs were met. And because without the ratios, you can't bring in more kiddos. And without sufficient staffing, if somebody goes out ill, especially during the time of COVID, guess what is a problem? So programs have to be very diligent in understanding their level of capacity. And when salaries are what they are, when benefit packages are what they are, and they're not sufficient enough and they don't cover, for some folks, the cost of living in an area such as Cambridge or even the greater Boston area at large, this is the reality. And, you know, what's interesting for me is as I've sat here looking at our field of out of school time and the incredible work that the practitioners and the educators do in it, they're often taken for granted. They're often looked down upon. You know, I grew up also as around educators. I was a former teacher, wife's in the schools. Like a lot of times, you know, educators at large have a hard time feeling like they get the proper respect. And then for the after school field, it feels even more of a challenge. And so the investment in our staff and the investment in keeping them in our programs, having them grow as professionals and compensating them appropriately is at a core level of what we need to address as we think about expansion, as core as the issues of space Aisha mentioned. And so we're looking forward to doing this expansion study so that it can produce recommendations for the city, by an extension for the Cambridge Public Schools, the nonprofit community, anyone who's willing to listen, to inform policy, to inform budgets, to inform action.
And if I can just add on, you know, I I get a little like, I don't know, weirded out by the word study. Like I feel like the oftentimes that we are doing studies, it takes time to do studies. And then the more time that it then takes to get the study, hear the recommendations, and then the action, we could be talking about 2 years out, right? And so my urgency, and I think y'all's urgency as constituents and family members and parents and all that caregivers is really thinking about, so what can we do in the interim of that to somewhat meet some of these needs? What does that look like? And as Kari mentioned, you know, and as many people mentioned in the chat, staffing is also very huge because those ratios, when you are a licensed program, ratios matter and ratios are real, and you cannot run your program effectively if you have 3 call outs for that day. Okay, it looks very different program to program. So, you know, I saw something in the chat around, so what can we be doing in an efficient way to help around staffing? I would love to hear from you all what options are out there. I know for Department of Human Services, they've tapped into even a temp agency to help with services, to have staff on deck basically for these reasons. But I know nonprofits may not have that same access, right? And so things definitely look different based on what you have access to as an organization. What resources are you able to tap into? So I just really wanted to underscore that around staffing and that being a huge challenge. So it's really hard to think about expanding when we may be having difficulties on the ground right now in meeting the need of the young people who are in front of us.
Thanks so much for that. And yeah, I know staffing has been identified as the central challenge, and there's been some, including organizers on the call like Eugenie and Amanda, who've called for, making the hiring and retention process more appealing, comparing the salary structure in Cambridge to other surrounding municipalities. How do we make the position more attractive? So I know these are ongoing conversations, and I'm sure we'll talk about that with the audience chat. Yeah, I mean, and something that's also coming up in the chat. I mean, we know that the city's made progress on serving more low-income families, but that community is not yet fully served. And a lot of audience members submitted questions about barriers to equitable access for students with IEPs to accessing quality after school. So do y'all want to talk about the equity dimension a little more? How can we expand after school in a way that prioritizes equity? And also, how can all the stakeholders meaningfully engage marginalized families and communities in the process? Who wants to? I don't know.
I'll jump in. I was the chair of the Special Education and Student Support Subcommittee when I was on the school committee for 4 years. And, a lot of the conversations, especially the talks that I had, close conversations with members of the CPAC, which is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, when they would talk about not having access to after school programs because of their child's needs, or the child has an IEP and it's just maybe they're out of district, maybe they're not, whatever the case is, but it's hard to get them into after school programs. I had to dive a little bit deeper to get a better sense of what does that ultimately look like. And again, from program to program, things look different. I know I had a very robust conversation with Assistant City Manager Ellen Semenoff and Director of Children Programs. Michelle, I know you're on the call. I apologize. Michelle Farnham, and I don't remember her actual beautiful long title. But I had a great conversation with them just yesterday and just getting a better sense of like the IEP process and how students get referred or evaluated and such. And what I learned is that, and Michelle's on the call, so maybe she can jump in as well to speak to this, if you all will allow, is that 1 in 5 kids in a program who are in DHSP do have an IEP. And so that's about 18% of the young people that are in Department of Human Services. And that there is quite a percentage of young people who are on the spectrum. And so when you are evaluating young people and identifying what their needs are, and so our inclusion specialists, they evaluate them at school, they have conversations with families, and so on and so forth, and they try to look at the program, the program that our young people, that the young person is, that the family is requesting for them to go into, what might be the need there and or the space in that program, so that this ends up being a successful placement for this young person, right, is critically important. So if the young person is on the spectrum, where are they on the spectrum? What are the needs that they have? Is it during transition times that they may, need an additional support? Is it completely like through the whole time they need an additional aid, a one-to-one provider? Or is it just, could they have an additional body that's just, changes the ratio? Say if it's 2 to 18 or 2 to 20, now they need 3 to 20. So what does that look like for space to space, classroom to classroom, based on a young person's need? So, I have a lot of respect for the folks who actually have to go through this process and identify and gather all this information so that they are making a very intentional placement and recommendation around what's the next step for a young person, because there are a lot of mechanisms. And so I do see that Michelle went off mute real quick. So if it's okay, Drew, can I invite Ms. Farnham into the conversation?
Yeah, Michelle.
Thank you.
Hey there. I've been driving. I just pulled into my driveway. So thank you. Aisha, you actually got most of that right. And it is a very complicated situation with children with IEPs, just in the sense that there is a, as you said, not always an understanding of what it looks like. And I've heard, I've presented at your committee when you were chairing and the school committee, Aisha, several times. And the data that you have is correct. It's we do have very close to 20% of the children enrolled in DHSP programs who currently have an IEP. And of the children enrolled, 17% of them are on the spectrum. So having an IEP or being diagnosed with ASD does not prevent you from accessing an after-school program. It really just, part of what we're trying to do is understand what that child's needs are. And sometimes what we have determined, as Aisha described, is that we may need additional supports up to and including a one-to-one support in order for someone to be able to be successful in the environment of after school, which looks really different than, say, a sub-separate classroom where there's a 3-to-1 ratio. And so some of what we're trying to determine is what might it take for a child to be successful in a very different environment, in a loud cafeteria where there are 20 children in one activity at a time, and that we're trying to determine how might this child be able to participate. And one of the biggest barriers right now for the inclusion of children with special needs is also staffing. And so, as Aisha described, often what we're talking about is needing to add an additional person to a group so that all the children can participate safely. And if we cannot hire that person, then it's really hard for that child to be able to join that group. Another piece, just because we were talking about the pandemic and the effect on both families and children, what we know and what we've seen, and I think you can talk to any school day teacher, is the effect on the pandemic on children right now. And one of the things that's happening is, as we are getting into the school year, or and learning and getting to know children who don't have IEPs are exhibiting great need. And so often what has happened is that children who are in the program, we're needing to hire extra support. So what would normally take 2.5 person staffing to support that classroom, we need another person. And so that means that hire goes to supporting the kids that are existing in that program. And we still need to hire an additional person for, say, the child who's waiting to get into the program. So it is very complicated.
Thank you for those insights, Michelle. Allegra, you had a response?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like much of what I want to say has been said already, but I'd still like to speak from the space of someone who's running an after-school program. And thank you, Michelle, for naming staffing again, because I was going to say it comes back to staffing for me. We have many of our children are neurospicy, and so are our staff. And we really, in our registration process, there's nothing that excludes anyone of any background with any sort of anything from registering. So that I can speak as us as a nonprofit who contracts with through DHSP to offer our after school programming. So we kind of sit kind of in the middle there. But we kind of work with both sides of this. And for me, everything that was said really just speaks to we need more staff. We've hired probably twice as many teachers as we normally would. We have an extra site director where there was one before the pandemic. We have an extra executive director where there was one. Like, capacity is needed at all levels of the organization, right? Oh, hi, Foibe. Foibe is our co-executive director. So we need capacity is needed at all levels. Not only are our children coming in with higher needs, so are our staff. So our staff are coming in and they're not necessarily able to manage stress in the same way that they used to. So a behavior from a child that previously wouldn't have triggered a teacher might trigger a teacher's this time around at this point in time. And so one of the things that I have to think about is that the students that we bring in, I want them to be successful, and the teachers that we bring in, I want them to be successful. And so what supports do I put in place for our teaching team so that they have access to wellness and self-care, and also for our students so that they are growing in their ability to monitor themselves and their behaviors without as much need, right, from the teachers to help direct their behavior for them, right? That's the goal, is that they'll be growing in their reflective capacities, they're growing in their awareness of how they're showing up in their bodies and in this space, and making decisions that are good for themselves and good for the people around them. The tension, right, with a lot of these pieces is that many of our staff are working multiple jobs. So not only is the income an issue, but where do you find the time to train, to have the conversation, to do the professional development when they're in school or they're at another job? And so time is also a resource that is a struggle. And then what do you do when someone has worked a shift somewhere else because they need to make ends meet? And then they come to work and they're already tired. They've already used up their energy, their spoons, their capacity for the day, and they don't have much left when they get to us. So, you know, building in breaks, building in, tap tap out, building in different resources to help all folks involved in the children's programming section of our work feel like they're supported, that they have the resources that they need, that we can increase capacity, and we can create a space where we can welcome all youth, because we have a team that is prepared to receive all youth and help them be here successfully.
Thank you so much for sharing those very important perspectives, Allegra. I think the best way to proceed now is to open up the stack, so the audience can interact with you all as panelists and with each other, with an eye towards talking about, you know, where do we go from here? We know we heard all these challenges. We know Cambridge has the resources. What's the path forward? What do we need from all the different agencies and stakeholders and the public to make this happen and realize universal care? I'm going to kick it to Derek Etkin, who's a parent leader on the CRESA board and a Cambridge Public School parent, to open up the stack.
All right, guys. We have lots of questions. I know I've got questions, but I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk. So we're going to try what's called a progressive stack. That's where if you guys actually could stop trying to chat and using the chat for your questions, and we can actually use your voice for the questions right now. Okay. So the way this is going to work is type in the chat, type the word stack and your name, and I will make it like walking up to the mic. I will call on you, and please try to keep it to 2 minutes. We're going to start by asking our question to our 3 panelists who can answer directly. We're also so lucky, as Drew mentioned, to have a lot of organizers, experienced professionals, former and current electeds. And so if someone has a direct response, maybe we could find a way for them to chime in, but please line up type stack, and you can go first.
And Derek, while we're doing that, can I just acknowledge electeds real quick? I just want to acknowledge Counselor Sabrina Wheeler, who was on the call. I saw that. A former school committee member who just retired, Fred Fantini, former school committee member, Nancy Tauber, former mayor and city councilor and state rep, Anthony Galluccio, on the call. And I think I got everybody, but yes, thank you all for being on this call.
Thank you. I'm so happy that so many people joined, honestly. Maritza Soto, why don't you go first and ask your question? You want to unmute yourself, please?
Thank you so much, Derek. And thank you all, especially Counselor Wilson, Carrie Milner, and Allegra Fletcher for this panel. I really appreciate you folks taking the time to talk to us about this, and Drew and Derek for organizing this. I have a question about, is there any possibility that, I know that Harvard's pilot agreement is going to be up for negotiation. Is there any way that we can tie this ask in with those negotiations? Counselor Wilson, do you have any ideas?
That's a really great question. Thank you for it, Maritza. I think, yes, we can absolutely put out an ask. You know, there's a huge need for space, and I would even say, especially as we think about North Cambridge, there's just not a lot of space for opportunities in North Cambridge area. So yes, I personally have not sat down with Harvard and look forward to. I have a good relationship and partnership with Tom Lucy from the Government Affairs Community. I don't know the title, excuse me, I apologize, but I do have a good relationship with him. So look forward to talking and seeing what the possibilities are around that, even around staffing. Like how can we tap into some of our Harvard students? You know, I know my former colleague from the workforce, Brian Zuliaga, is on the call. He's part of PBHA, and I know that they do a great robust program with CYEP. But is there more that we can be doing in partnership with some of our youth, you know, clubs and stuff that are at Harvard and MIT, who they could be tapping in or doing some service work and providing and being bodies at some of our youth centers or other spaces, the nonprofits and everything throughout our city. So I look forward to having more of a robust conversation there.
Okay, no one else is stepping up to the mic. I have oh, Jacqueline, you're next. Yourself. I got you, Jackie. Hold on. You have to unmute yourself. There you go. Yep.
Okay. So my name is Jacqueline Smith. I'm a grandmother to a 10-year-old who is in an out-of-district placement, and she's been there since after second grade. So third grade, she's in fifth grade now. She started out going to the YMCA after school program because that was going to be most convenient for her parents. And so when she then left for an out-of-district placement, she maintained her position there. They have been really good with her. She had a lot of anxiety in addition to her learning differences. She is much better now. Not much better to return to the public schools, but she has really lost her community. She's a very social little girl, and but she is not into sports, so she doesn't meet people that way, or children her age that way. As of she's has probably another year to go at the YMCA, and then she will have no after school, and really is not part of a community. I and her mom fiercely believe in the public schools, but she cannot go to the public school, and there is no way in which even kids who go are in out-of-district placements are ever brought together or know what's happening in the public schools so that they
Jackie,
can.
that's 2 minutes. So please.
Oh, sorry.
concise.
Okay. Well, that's my issue.
Mm.
As how to remedy that for her and other children in the same predicament. Thank you.
I have to say
John,
thank you.
oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
I don't know if we're doing response. I don't know, Derek, how you all want to do it. I don't have a direct response. Jacqueline, I would just say thank you for sharing. You know, I think the complexities of our young people, the needs and meeting the needs in our programs. I'm happy that she's getting the support that she needs at the YMCA, and I'm sure that with the continued relationship and partnerships, you know, that continuity will serve her extremely well, and for you all as her caregivers as well.
Jonathan, you're next. You want to unmute yourself?
Thank you. Excellent stuff. Three semi-quantitative questions. Could somebody estimate just what fraction of the kids in the Cambridge Public Schools do have access to after school? Secondly, the staffing. Are these full-time positions, half-time positions, 10 hours a week? Do they have benefits? Are they varied, you know, from program to program? And third, someone has said that the after-school program depends upon the funding from the tax from the university taxes. My understanding, it's in the city council budget. Human services is part of the city council budget. City could use its excess cash. Could use, you know, to just appropriate more. Thanks.
I could take a shot at the first question around percentage of
Thank you, Corey.
students. Yes. So it does vary a bit from time of year versus after school and summer. And some of that is connected to some of the issues that have been brought up about programs that serve kids on certain levels of IEPs, how programs are set up for SEI students, and how there's not the matching number of programs that coincide with the summer and with the after school year. But overall, we're hovering closer to about 60% for grades K to 5 of students being able to access 5-day-a-week programs for the most part. It had dipped definitely during COVID. It's building back up. So even earlier this year might have been less than 60. And we're going to do this study, you know, and I know it sounds like, you know, in Cambridge, we're not going to go into a laboratory. I promise, Aisha. Anybody who knows building equity bridges, that essentially was a research project as well. So we'll do quantitative, qualitative, participatory, all types of research to seek more information and understand some of the root causes contributing to them. I think I'll also add that, you know, reason I distinguish between at 5th grade is like really 6th to 8th grade, we've noticed that the programs, and any of us who have children know students are kind of opting in and opting out different times of the year, different days of the week. It's more fluid. And so it's kind of harder to quantify the dosage in a way that is a percentage. It's more about like, if you go to 3 days a week or more, perhaps is a way to look at it, and a way that we often do use a threshold. And then how many weeks of the summer might a student participate is also a threshold. I think I have another comment, but I think I'm going to maybe pass it for the other questions you were asking in terms of where the funds come from to support after school in the city. And I think you also had a question about the percentage of full-time staff, which I think varies from sort of nonprofit to nonprofit. And also Michelle may be able to share some other summaries from DHSP. And again, not to sound like I'm repeating myself, this is really why we're doing this expansion project study as well. So we can get a snapshot of where we are now, because it's been a fluid situation and this field unfortunately has not been stable.
So in regards to budget, I would say that there, you know, Department of Human Services there is a line item for Department of Human Services in the city budget. And so what does that look like for specific on the ground after school supports and resources? Maybe Michelle could speak to that a little bit. But yeah, I just know that there is a line item for them, for the whole department. And that just covers, I mean, Department of Human Services covers an array of various services, from literally the babies from infancy all the way up to elderly. So I'll just name that.
I'd also like to speak to your question about whether the after-school teaching roles are part-time or full-time. Most after-school teaching roles are part-time. They're about 4 hours an afternoon, and there's often some prep time in there, but not always. Sometimes they come with benefits, sometimes they don't. So it depends on the organization, the program that is running the program. Depends on the place that's running the program that will determine what kind of benefits. So you might have a place with none, or you might have a place that offers dental, vision, different kinds of things like that. But I'm not aware of anywhere in Cambridge that offers full-time benefits, benefits that you would expect as a full-time staff to our part-time teaching team, which I think is a really excellent point in terms of thinking about our staffing issues and the turnover rates that we have in terms of like the needs that people have and the difficulty of meeting them when you don't have certain benefits.
I can just ditto what Allegra said. And I noticed in the chat, Andrew, about that 3/4 of most after-school jobs are part-time. And that's not just a Cambridge figure. This is a structural issue in the field nationwide. This is how we haven't caught up to preschool in terms of having benefited and full-time jobs, let alone what the preschool teachers are facing, which is pay equity with school teachers. So after school is behind even preschool. And so that this is the major problem. This is a structural problem with the field. And so this is partly why this is not an overnight fix, that we're talking about pay equity, we're talking about training, we're talking about systemic growth of what is traditionally part-time, temporary jobs to becoming more full-time and stable, and understanding that, you know, it requires skill and training to run quality after-school programs. So the industry has not caught up with the need for families.
But I'm sure that we're going to learn all of that and so much more in that study that's going to happen, right? That's going to definitely highlight it, emphasize it, underscore it times 1,000. That just says, you know, there's a huge issue and a huge barrier to the cost of living and the cost of salaries that we have. Yes, I see in the chat about 4 hours. No one can live off of 4 hours. And that's maybe true. And other people, again, as Allegra mentioned earlier, some people have multiple jobs, right? And that's maybe their choosing. And for some cases, I will say, you know, because there was a time when I was a youth worker and I worked a part-time job, and that's what I wanted, because maybe I was in school also part-time, and whatever the case was, that worked for my schedule at that time, right? And sure, there's a lack of, you know, full-time opportunities. And so that growth, that ability to expand, what might it look like for us to have some youth workers that may go into our teen centers maybe in the afternoon, but maybe do some paraprofessional stuff during the day. And through that, maybe they're getting a 30-hour week that's benefited because it's maybe in partnership with the schools and DHSP. What might something like that look like? And I know, you know, Kari, with the youth connectors, we have a couple of those kinds of positions that, right, Kari? Like there was some folks that were working during the day in our middle schools, but then in the afternoons, they would be at our youth centers. And so that's a great program. And so to me, it's something that when we see things that are working and working well, how can we expand upon that? And understand, like, that also helps with building relationships with our young people. When you see a young person in the school day, in their school, in their classrooms and all that, but you're also seeing them in the afternoons, they stick to you like glue, and they become like your young person, or you become their like navigator or their special person that they want to cling to. And that really helps with building of relationships. I saw somebody, Christopher, just put something in chat about the salaries and how they actually increased over the last 2 years. And maybe Michelle, you might be able to speak to that. Because just about 2, maybe 3 years ago, it was under $20, and now it's like up to 22. So maybe Michelle, can you talk a little bit about like how did we get to that point, and then what might the future be around salary?
Sure. Absolutely. We've, since the pandemic, I think we offered 2 or 3 raises for our part-time youth-facing jobs. We also have been experimenting with creating some full-time teaching roles where, exactly as you described, as some of you know, we've got a King Open Extended Day program, which was a pilot, I think close to 20 years ago, where that was the design, where the frontline staff worked part of the day in the school day classrooms, and then continued on to the extended day and after school. And so we, using that as a model, we have been able to create a handful. Last year, in fact, we funded 10 positions. That is the model. And this is our pilot right now. And part of why we need this, people don't want to hear it, but the study is to understand, is that the way forward? This is a pilot. We don't know. We know we're having a lot of turnover. We have an assumption that giving people benefits and more hours and sort of an ability to grow in the field could be stabilizing for the workforce and for them. But we're trying that out right now. What we know is that in the King Open program, where we in the city have had that model, we have had a lot of stability. We have had staff that haven't turned over as much, but the pandemic has made things much different all around. So in other programs where we have had stability with part-time staff, it's looking different right now. And so that is something that we're trying. I know that there are several nonprofits that also have a very similar position where they have benefited teaching staff at about 30 hours a week. And that's not true everywhere. But that's, again, something that people are trying to make the jobs more attractive, but also to stabilize people staying in those positions. Someone talked about the $22 or $24 an hour being what they believe to be low. Like I said, that is, we've raised those that salary 2 times. And what you need to understand is that they have bosses that don't make much more than that, who are full-time and benefited. And so what we're saying is this is a structure of an entire industry. So it's not just about throw money at them. That is great, but I can't have Allegra going out of business, her place going out of business, because now we're paying $40,000, which does not seem that much for, a frontline teacher, when what we know is that the bosses of the frontline teachers make 45. And so this is the industry structure that what we're talking about trying to undo. And so it's a much bigger problem than just paying more per hour to our frontline staff. It's layered and complicated and is nationwide. This is not a Cambridge problem. So I just want to share that.
Okay, we've got, it's 8:10, and I really want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their questions. So I've got a couple people on stack, and please try to keep your question to like really 1 minute so we can have everyone share. The next person is Ana Arribas. Come on, unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's not really a question. I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that latecomers to the system, or immigrants, or students in the SEI groups. So these are the sheltered English immersion classes, so classes that are only for English learners, have even more difficult to access the after school once we get to Cambridge in the summer or in September, and there is absolutely nothing opening. And also, so we are families that don't have like the connection, the network, the information, the resources to get something. So maybe this is also these kids usually don't share their classes with local students, so they are not like being part of the community. They have like their exclusive classes for English learners. So after school activities would be great for them in order to connect with the community, but generally this is not the case. I guess that the percentage of families in these classes that do not have after school programs is much higher than in the general community. So I just wanted to bring your attention about that, so that this is something that can be like taken into account when designing like offerings, programs, and yeah, everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Next on stack, we've got Kathleen Byrne. If you want to unmute and share your comment, question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Anna, thanks for that point. I live so in my head about being the parent of a disabled child. It's helpful. It's great to hear the other points of view. Yes, please. And it's also been great to be here because I live one side of the challenge, right? Again, parenting a child with disabilities and understanding the complexities of the staffing and the wages and benefits is a great counterpoint to, again, what I see in my day-to-day. I think you all probably know this, but the going rate for someone to be hired to provide that same after school care privately is like $30 to $35 an hour, right? So I can see how it would very easily be more beneficial to these folks to not take these jobs and work privately. But what I want to say is that the frustration that I have felt over the past couple of months is in continuing to raise these issues that you're seeing in the chat here about kids on IEPs and just getting blanked by the city administration. And again, I see the complexities here in participating in this conversation, but I have tried to advocate for my child and try to point out these discrepancies and have had emails gone unanswered, conversations started with people, and then the follow-up promise to not happen. And it's so difficult and so challenging, and it makes me not trust the system because there is just no response. I won't call out individuals' names, but there are like, it's all of the ones you would expect. And I've sent half a dozen emails to everyone. And I just want to point out that it's really challenging to be a parent and to advocate and to not get any kind of response. So this is great. I appreciate this conversation here. But if there's anything we can do to like, get more involvement regularly, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. I want to make sure everyone has a chance. And actually, so we have a Julie Curtis who, like me, often on these calls is with kids and muted. So Julie, I'm going to do my best to ask your question here. And it's a question I share as well. It's really like, if whether budget or space or staffing is the primary barrier to expansion. And I guess really like, I might just tag on to that question I've been trying to ask for a long time is, you mentioned there's a line item, DHSP is a line item. And in talking to people, providers all over the city, I've met all of these heroes, anecdotes about heroic efforts to make use of the resources that we have. My question is, what I'm trying to understand is, that line item that is the constraint under which all of these incredible people are working. And what I'm, as a voter, as a taxpayer, whatever, like, that number is a political question. That is outside of what anyone on this call alone can do. But we have hundreds and hundreds of parents with all these needs, and how can we turn this administrative question into a political question where we can say, we will be happy, like, let's talk about pilot, let's talk about something that can ask of something more of this tremendous tax base we have, the tremendous wealth we have next door to tremendous need. And if maybe the panelists could start, like, we're not asking you to do more with the limited things. What could you do with more? And, like, what can we do as the community to, like, make that happen?
I want to appreciate the question, Derek, and just, appreciate the complexity of it too. I do know that our city manager is definitely, he is a champion of after school. He is absolutely committed to after school and after school expansion and everything. And so I will do my best in my work with my colleagues on the council to push on these issues, continue to push, and to continue to understand, as we learn more through this study as well, to really see kind of not only where we are today, but what does the future actually look like. And the complexities of hiring is a real one, because it doesn't matter how many job postings are out there. If we can't hire people to fill those jobs, those positions, we need to get a better sense and understanding as to the why. What is going on there that actually makes that, sorry, it is past bedtime over here. But what is it that we need to be doing to offer, to really have a more robust offering to those who could be interested in these positions? At one point I was saying, how can we tap into our paraprofessionals? Well, if paras are getting paid, $30 or something, I don't know, 20 something dollars an hour, why would they want to then decrease their salary to work in our youth centers, right? So how do we look at pay equity across the board? And I'll mute.
Thanks, Aisha. I can add some thoughts on this. So this feels like the beginning of a whole nother Zoom, and it's related, but we cannot shortchange a conversation like this. The system itself of after school and out of school type care itself, it's built in a way that it doesn't serve the needs of our communities. It doesn't serve the needs of our children or our families or our staff. And that's what we're hearing. And this is true, as Michelle said, across the country. The way our schools are built are limited in ways that we know, and they don't fulfill all the needs. And Cambridge has an abundance of resources that it has put into our schools in a way that many communities cannot. And so some of the issues that folks are talking about, they experience in after school, many people experience in their own schools in other communities because of a lack of resources. And so that's not okay. The issue is that we have an opportunity, if you're talking about how a political slant on this or an activism slant on this, it's about how do we think about reforming, reimagining, disrupting, rebuilding a system that's centering the needs of our young people and all of them, right? And the needs of our families, the needs of our staff, the things that we're hearing right now. And it's hard to do that by piecing together small pieces of solutions. I'm not gonna say Band-Aids, but we just heard tonight, like increasing salaries and by little increments, and then sort of the unintended consequences of that. Not the economics here, but like the business world, and even the idea of supporting small businesses, right? So like, if we're going to support, let's start with DHSP as the largest provider, and hey, let's throw 33% more salary at everybody, then we need to subsidize the nonprofit community of providers as well. And if we believe in investing in the programs, we believe in investing in our children, let's take a risk and try that. That may not be the number, but let's be ambitious. Let's be radical in that way. Inching along is going to get us so far. And, in terms of the SEI story and the IEP story, like, I hate to minimize it that way, but there's irony in that. There's a summer program that actually supports SEI children in a way that kids, in OSS don't have as many opportunities, and then vice versa. During the school year, there's not as many after-school programs as we just heard. So the system is not set up correctly. And the last thing I'll just mention is, at least for now, is it's not just about being creative, it's being logical. I mean, we could start to flex certain people's schedules so they work different times of the day. They could be full-time. They don't have to work 10 hours a day. They don't have to work 11 hours a day. Our children need support sometimes that many hours a day, depending on how folks work or who's available at home. But, we have, again, systems that are set up a certain kind of way that don't have coverage for the full day. And so we try to do that through partnership, through more seamless supports, through, somebody mentioned heroes. I think Derek said that. Yes, we try to do it through the human power and the conviction and commitment we have to our community and to our children. But we could do better. We could look at, okay, let's understand how we could reconfigure staffing, how we could reconfigure who we hire and what time of day they start and end their day, what their skill sets are, how they increase their skills, how we keep them in our city and keep them in our programs. And I don't want it to sound simple, and I also don't want it to sound like I'm exhausting everything that needs to be looked at. But what I'm hearing here is there's a lot of issues at play, and so we need to take a hard look at how these systems are set up.
I appreciate the question and just the dream space that's being opened up in terms of thinking about the next steps and how we can do things differently. And, when I think about the question of what could you do with more, right? What could you do with the limits removed? For me, that it's a really fun space to be in. And then there's also sometimes the day-to-day reduces your capacity to dream and your capacity to think beyond the present crisis. And so there are many things to address on a given day, and just the getting the licensing. So our program is licensed through EEC. Just getting the licensing paperwork together is a hassle, and takes time and it takes capacity. And so it's worth it, right? But it does take time and it does take capacity. And I think there's I have lots of thoughts and feelings about the time and capacity that it takes, and what I could do if my time could be shifted elsewhere. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm appreciative for that invitation, because I'm thinking about the staff. I'm thinking about, when I think about the limits, one of the biggest limits for me is time and capacity. Like, do we have the energy? Can we show up? Can we actually dream? Are we thinking about our space? Are we reflecting? Are we growing? And I appreciate spaces like this and the coalition work that's happening with Agenda for Children, because those are the spaces where we can do this kind of work. So yeah, not a direct response, but more a continued reflection.
And yeah, I look forward to just continuing to be in partnered spaces with like-minded people who are doing the good work, and looking forward to continuing to do some good trouble around how we meet the needs. I think in my North Star, my wish is that all kids who need have. And that's access to everything and anything that they want to do throughout our city. Why? Because we are a resource-rich city. And so when young people are going without services, after school provided care, I really just wish that we could meet the need. And what does it look like to actually meet the need? What needs to be in place in order to make that happen? So I appreciate the dream space as well. And I think from a nonprofit as well as to the public sector, just what is it that we need to put into play to make all mechanisms work well? And again, while we're working under systems, it's really about dismantling systems and rebuilding, recreating, reimagining how we come together collectively to do this kind of work, to care for our youngest, our most vulnerable, our youth in need, who deserve to have robust spaces after school to continue to grow and be nurtured with their peers and with caring adults. That's what I wish for and hope for. But I really want to just say thank you to this group for, again, convening this panel and convening this space. I think it was definitely a robust conversation. And what I see and what I'm taking away is that some people actually got to understand a little bit more about the complexities in doing and all that goes into after school care. And that there's a number of different things that providers have to grapple with in order to meet the needs of the young people who are in front of them. And while the idea and thought around expansion is a beautiful one, and we look forward to getting there, through this study, we'll get to understand even more about what is that roadmap to get us to that place, from pay to the hiring practices to full-time job opportunities, partnerships in our schools, so much more. So I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to having more conversations, and I'll put my email in the chat so people can continue to reach out to me as your local city councilor. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. So we're a little pressed for time here. We're sort of at the my co-hosts are DMing me over here trying to come up with a plan. We had a lot of questions, and I'm sorry. There's Carolyn and a couple other people are on stack, and I wasn't sure exactly how to handle that. We were thinking that maybe what would be nice is, we have everyone, all the attendees, we have your emails. We will absolutely let everyone know about any future panels or events. If you don't mind us sending you a message about that. Of course, Aisha Wilson, City Councilor Aisha Wilson is leaving her email in the chat. If you can send her your questions directly. We are going to make this recording available in some capacity. We're also going to make the chat available in some capacity. If someone said something interesting that you want to try to follow up with, or you want to, please reach out to myself, Aaron, or Drew directly if you wanted to connect with that person that said something interesting, because we're going to need a lot of organizing to move forward and relationships. And so we're hoping that this can be the beginning of that, contribute to the spaces that are working on this. So with that, I just want to respect everyone's time. And unless Aaron
Derek,
or Drew or Pam, please, please,
I'm
you're
sorry,
better at this than me.
I just want to add one more thing that I think is really important. And, again, while I recognize that after school services and the resource around after school is really, could be a touchy subject for some, those who get a slot, those who don't get a slot, what does that look like? I also want to make sure that we are leaving this space trying to give some grace to the process, because while it is crazy complex, and from nonprofits to private to public to everything, folks are really working hard. And this is what I'm learning through my, conversations that I've been having with a number of partners, is that folks are working really hard to identify how they meet the need. What does it look like to stretch their capacity when they are licensed programs and they are at a capacity? What does that look like? You know, when some families only need 1 day of care versus a family that needs the 5-day full service, what does that look like across the board? And so I just want folks to really leave here just giving some grace to our providers, those who are working to really meet the needs. And as we continue to grow and learn in this space, continue to learn and grow with us. Thank you.
Amen. Thanks so much, Aisha. Thanks so much to our incredible panelists. Give them a round of applause. Let's give each other a round of applause. I mean, this just goes to show that I think the political constituency for universal after school is here in Cambridge. Just like you got to organize and build a political constituency for public schools, that exists here in Cambridge, and the Cambridge Residence Alliance is looking forward to just connecting with other parents. Emmy just dropped the Caregiver Council. That's another important effort going on in the chat. That, you know, of actual deep engagement in communities that's happening, and to try to get parents' voices and perspectives in meaningful ways to inform OST expansion. And yeah, we'll send a follow-up email with the video and hopefully collaborate with y'all for further events, and, you know, to get a citywide coordinated universal after school initiative underway, like the universal pre-K initiative, I think is what we're seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your participation, and looking forward to more.